The final ember, a night in a Roman bathhouse, 130 CE. The sun has dipped low behind the tiled roofs of Rome, leaving the sky a smear of honeyed gold and soft gray. The city sighs as evening falls, its energy drawing inward like a deep breath held at the end of a long day. Beyond the bustle of merchants and the fading shouts of market stalls, the grand silhouette of the Thermae, the public bathhouse, waits like a temple bathed in its own kind of hush. The walls are high, solemn, and familiar. Their pale stone glows in the last rays of the day. Ivy curls along the edges like lazy scribbles, and carved reliefs catch the light with gentle dignity, scenes of nymphs pouring water, of gods reclining, of strong-backed workers lifting basins. This is not a place of performance. It is a place of ritual. Of the everyday made sacred. The wide doors, built of thick cedar and bound with bronze studs, creak open one last time as the final patrons slip inside. A tired woman with weathered sandals and a woven shawl. Two boys with ink-stained fingers, whispering as they duck beneath a colonnade. A stoic baker with flour still on his arms, carrying a pair of wooden sandals wrapped in linen. No one speaks loudly. Voices soften here. Inside, the air changes. The world becomes muffled. Warm. The marble beneath their feet is cool and worn smooth by decades of quiet passage. Oil lamps flicker along the corridor walls, their flames nodding gently behind curved glass. Shadows stretch long and fluid across pillars and archways. There is no rush. The bathhouse is a world apart, neither night nor day, neither public nor private. Time folds in on itself. And for those who enter now, in this final hour, the pace of things slows, like a river pooling into stillness. At the entrance, an old attendant sits on a low stool, bundled in a woolen wrap despite the warmth inside. His name is Flavius, though few use it anymore. He has been here for more years than he can count, and his presence is like the stone itself, quiet, solid, unnoticed unless you're looking. He watches each visitor enter, nodding once in recognition. Not in greeting, but in acknowledgement, he sees them. He remembers. The man with the limp who always bathes alone. The woman who brings her own jar of lavender oil. The young student who carries a scroll he never reads. Their lives unfold before him in fragments. He takes their sandals and wraps them in linen, placing them in cubbies without looking. His fingers know the motion by memory. He murmurs a warning, the caldarium is hotter tonight. The hypocaust has been stoked since mid-afternoon. A gesture toward the oil room. A soft reminder to keep voices low. Flavius does not bathe anymore. He has not entered the water in years. But he knows its rhythms, the hiss of steam, the way condensation gathers on the brass fixtures, the scent of cedar wood rising from the hot stones. He listens to it all from his stool, hearing what others do not, the heartbeat of the bathhouse. In a pouch beside him, he keeps a small crust of bread, a stub of wax tablet, and a polished bronze coin. For luck. Or for company. No one asks. No one needs to. This is his final post of the day. When the last bather leaves, and the fires burn low, he will shutter the doors. He will lock them with the iron rod that creaks when turned. Until then, he watches. And waits. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the tepidarium, the warm room, everything slows to a hush. The domed roof rises high above like an upturned shell, its curves echoing the softest of sounds, a cough, the drip of water from hair, the shift of skin against stone. The arches curve inward like arms embracing the space, catching voices and softening them into whispers. Here, warmth clings not just to the air, but to the very stones themselves. The walls are painted in gentle earth tones, ochre and umber and faded red, depicting quiet scenes of rest. A nymph sits by a pool, her hand trailing in painted water. A shepherd naps under an almond tree. The images are softened by years of moisture and steam, the colors no longer vivid but comforting, like the memory of a story once told in full. Visitors sit quietly along the marble benches that ring the room. Their towels are wrapped around shoulders or draped over laps. A woman combs the ends of her damp hair with a carved bone pick, her gaze unfocused, drifting. A father rests with his young son curled against him, the boy half asleep, head tucked beneath his arm. No one speaks above a murmur. It is not forbidden, but somehow, it feels improper to disturb the peace that settles here like mist. Two older men speak in low Latin near a brazier, their conversation a trickle of sound carried along the curved walls. They discuss something mundane, a shipment of olive oil delayed, a neighbor's sick goat, but even such things feel distant in this setting, like dreams that fade upon waking. The bathhouse has a way of stripping away urgency. Concerns brought in from the outside world feel irrelevant once wrapped in steam and silence. High above, tiny holes in the dome let in the faintest dusting of starlight. The smoke from the brazier rises in lazy curls, catching the faint beams and turning them silver. Somewhere near the corner, the sound of a wet cloth being wrung out echoes like a sigh. A young boy tiptoes through, carrying a small amphora of scented oil. His bare feet make soft pats against the tile, and he pauses before one of the patrons, a woman with tired eyes and cracked hands. He pours a few drops into her waiting palms. The scent, rosemary, perhaps, or myrtle, rises and mingles with the warm air. She closes her eyes and breathes deeply. She does not speak. The warmth in this room is gentle. Not the biting heat of the caldarium, nor the cool stillness of the frigidarium, but something in between. A space for transition. For quiet. In the corner, an elderly man slowly stretches his arms above his head, his joints creaking like old hinges. His eyes are closed. He is not here for cleanliness. He is here to remember what it is to feel ease. To allow his body, often stiff and sore, to melt just a little. Beneath the great arches, time has no authority. The night advances outside, but here, it pauses. The fires below the floor still burn low and steady, the heat radiating upward like a soft heartbeat. Somewhere beyond, in the corridors leading to the hotter rooms, the sound of distant water echoes, like someone calling from another world. The bathhouse does not speak. It only listens. It holds the weight of silence, and within that silence, everything becomes softer, slower, suspended. The fire in the hypocaust, the underfloor furnace that breathes warmth into the very bones of the bathhouse, burns in slow, steady rhythm now. No longer roaring, but glowing. Its coals are rich and red, tucked under layers of ash like secrets under skin. A worker in a soot-dark tunic tends the fire with quiet familiarity, nudging embers with an iron poker. He does not speak. This fire has spoken to him in its own language for years. Above him, the stone floors remain warm to the touch, holding the memory of flame like the way palms hold the last trace of a lover's embrace. The bathhouse breathes. Every room expands and settles, like a body falling into sleep. Even the stones seem drowsy now, their heat softened and worn. In the caldarium, the hot room, only a few linger. One man reclines with his back against the warm wall, his arms resting across his knees, steam rising from his skin like fog over a river. He's not asleep, not quite, but his mind drifts somewhere between. A dreamless place. Nearby, a servant pours a thin stream of water onto a brazier. The hiss it makes is brief and soothing, like the exhale of a dragon long forgotten. In this hour, the bathhouse begins to empty itself of sound. Footsteps grow fewer. Conversations, once muffled and low, vanish altogether. The scrape of a sandal, the flutter of a robe, the clink of pottery on stone, these are now the loudest things in the world. A single oil lamp flickers in the corridor. The flame, barely tall as a thumb, dances in its terracotta dish. Its light throws long shadows across the mosaic floor, tiny tesserae depicting gods who no longer speak, animals caught mid-leap, eyes that watch forever from under worn brows. The gods of cleanliness and health. The spirits of water and heat. They remain, even as the visitors go. A woman dries her feet slowly in the apoditerium, the changing room. She is older, her hands worn and careful. She folds her garments piece by piece, her tunic, her girdle, her outer cloak. The folds are sharp. Each movement deliberate. There is no rush. She ties her hair with a strip of linen and lets her eyes linger one last time on the arched doorway behind her. Then, quietly, she steps into her sandals and leaves. The attendant who mans the entrance sits now beside a low wooden table, half dozing. A clay cup of mulled wine warms his hand, though he no longer sips it. He watches the brazier dim. He will stay until the last visitor leaves, and until the embers go black. Outside the bathhouse, the city of Rome lies quiet under a heavy curtain of night. The streets are empty but for the occasional clatter of a cart's wheel or the bark of a restless dog. The stars glint dimly through smoke-hazed skies. Somewhere not far, a temple bell rings a single tone, marking nothing in particular, just reminding the dark that it's still there. Back inside, the last of the warm air gathers near the vaulted ceiling. It will remain a little while longer, clinging to the upper reaches of the bathhouse like steam on a mirror. Soon, it will disperse. Soon, the silence will be complete. And yet, something remains. Not just heat, not just moisture. Something more fragile and invisible, a trace of human stillness. Of peace, breathed out and caught in the air like perfume. The ember does not burn forever. But tonight, it burns still. The doors are shut now. Not slammed, but sealed with a gentle finality. A hush settles into the bathhouse like dust falling through still air. There is no applause for nightfall, no procession for its arrival, only the patient closing of shutters, the creak of wood, the soft press of a latch. The city beyond may still murmur in alleys and upper rooms, but inside, it is as if the air has thickened. Heavier. Wiser. Beneath the grand arches and decorated vaults, the absence of voices is not empty, it is full. Full of echoes, of memory, of warmth that lingers even as the heat wanes. The water in the pools lies unmoving now. No hand disturbs its surface. No ripple dances across the edges. The tepidarium, once alive with shifting bodies and laughter, has become a hall of reflections. On its surface float the pale outlines of painted ceilings, faint as dreams. In the dim glow of a high wall sconce, shadows begin to stretch. They crawl across the curved walls like slow vines, reshaping familiar places into quiet mysteries. A stone lion's head, once gurgling with perfumed water, stands dry now, its mouth gaping silently into the room. Its carved eyes, dark with time, seem to blink in the flicker of firelight. Beneath the floor, the hypocaust breathes more slowly. The fires have been tamped down, but they do not sleep. They smolder in patient rhythm, like the heartbeats of something ancient beneath the stone. The system of bricks and channels that once carried heat to every room now carries only silence. Warm bricks still cradle the last of the day's energy. The warmth rises in ghostly columns, seen only in the shimmer of air above the tile. And under all of this, under the tiles and the pipes, under the decorated mosaics of dolphins and nereids, under the sandals and the ash, there is the bathhouse's secret body. Pipes of lead and clay run like veins. Small tunnels like lungs. Storage rooms like buried hearts. It is a second bathhouse, invisible, humming in its own way. It was not made for beauty, but for function. And in the silence of the night, its hum becomes a lullaby. A single figure moves among the rooms now. A cleaning servant, his footsteps muffled by worn soles. His name is not known to those who bathe here. He arrives after the patrons have gone. His presence is not marked in ledgers, nor is his face known to the city's elite. But he knows every corner of this place, every cracked tile, every loose hinge, every spot where the water leaks a little too quickly through the drains. Tonight, he walks with a lamp in hand. It casts a golden ring of light around his sandaled feet. He walks through the apoditerium, past piles of damp cloth and the lingering scent of oils. Past the strigil rack, where the small metal tools lie drying like tiny silver fish. He does not hurry. He moves like someone entering a sacred place. In the frigidarium, he stops. The cold pool reflects the curve of the dome above like a black mirror. He sets the lamp on the floor. Then, silently, he kneels beside the water, dips a small copper bowl in, and pours it slowly over the marble edge. It spills with a gentle splash, washing nothing in particular, just acknowledging the silence. Just marking that this space still breathes. This is the bathhouse as few see it. After laughter. After the rituals of cleansing. After the last towel is folded. It is a place returned to itself. A sacred cavity in stone, where heat and water once mingled with the human body, and now only their ghost remains. In the caldarium, the heat lingers longer. Even as the fires dim, the steam hangs thick in the air like a curtain, softening every surface, muting every edge. The marble benches still glisten faintly with moisture. The high windows are fogged and glowing faintly from the moon outside, giving the whole chamber the look of a room trapped inside a dream. The servant enters slowly, careful not to disturb the air too much. Here, movement is heavy, like walking through breath. His lamp dims in the steam, the flame flickering low and uncertain. He knows better than to linger long in this room when the bath is empty. Without conversation or footsteps or laughter to fill it, the caldarium becomes too loud in its silence. There, the small bronze faucet above the hot basin still weeps. Not a rush, not a drip, just the faintest release of warmth, like the bathhouse sighing in its sleep. Beneath the faucet, the smooth bowl is half filled with water the color of honeyed glass. On its surface floats a single leaf, left behind, perhaps, from someone's oil or herbal soak. It spins slowly in place, caught in a current too small to see. On the far wall, a robe hangs forgotten. Thin wool, damp at the hem, pale and nearly blending into the stone behind it. Someone must have left in haste. Or simply trusted it would still be there tomorrow. It has no owner now, only a presence. The servant looks at it briefly, then leaves it be. In the silence, it seems unkind to interfere. Further on, the massage room is still warm with scented air. Crushed myrtle, a trace of bay, the faint sharpness of mint. Here, impressions remain, not visible, but present. The padded bench still carries the warmth of bodies no longer there. The low stool is slightly out of place. A strigil has slipped to the floor, a single curved arm of bronze peeking out from beneath a folded cloth. The servant picks it up and places it gently on the shelf. It makes no sound. He does not need to think about what he's doing. His hands know this place like a musician knows an instrument. The marble responds to him. The room responds. Even the air seems to hush, aware of its own history being handled. Outside the massage room, a small fountain gurgles. It is one of the few things still moving in the bathhouse tonight. Water trickles down over a slab of dark stone etched with an inscription, now softened by time and mist. The Latin letters are barely legible in the low light, but the servant knows them by heart. They speak not of gods or emperors, but of cleanliness, and peace, and the renewal of the body. A different kind of sanctity. He stops there for a moment, allowing the sound of the water to fill him. Not noise, just rhythm. A beat against the quiet. A soft voice in a cathedral of stone. Far above, the oculus in the dome allows a shaft of pale moonlight to enter. It cuts the steam into silver ribbons, as if slicing the night itself. Dust and vapor swirl in its path. Tiny motes of ash and marble powder dance silently, suspended in air that has seen centuries. This, too, is part of the ritual. The ritual that no one sees. The one that happens when sandals no longer clatter and laughter no longer echoes. The ritual of return. Of stillness. Of gratitude. Of closing. Somewhere deep within the walls, the last of the heat shifts. A tile cracks softly. Not from damage, but from release. A tiny sound that belongs to the night. A sound only the stones understand. And the servant moves on, lamp in hand, into the next chamber of forgetting. Behind a discreet archway, away from the grand mosaic halls and boasting voices of men, lies a quieter wing of the Thermae, the women's corridor. It is smaller, less adorned. The marble is simpler here, the decorations more delicate. A nymph carved into the wall fountain wears a smile softened by decades of dripping water. Her foot is chipped. No one has repaired it. It makes her more human somehow. The servant steps lightly here. His sandals make only the barest whisper against the tiles. It is not out of reverence for rules, no one enforces them now at this hour. It is out of something older. A hush that clings to the air, as if the women's laughter still lingers, like perfume that hasn't fully faded. There are still signs of presence here. A wooden comb lies beside a basin, a single strand of dark hair caught in its teeth. A half-used tablet of lavender soap rests on the rim, its corners softened from many hands. A linen wrap, damp and crumpled, has been forgotten on a bench. It carries the ghost of its owner's warmth, now nearly gone. The hot room here is smaller than the men's, its ceiling lower, its heat gentler. The walls are less decorated, save for one fresco of Venus at her mirror, her gaze not at the viewer but down at her own reflection, caught mid-thought. Her painted arm is flaking. Her mirror is half erased. But the effect is no less lovely for it. In the dimness, it looks like she is turning away, vanishing slowly into the wall. The servant does not linger. He moves through the dim chambers like breath through reeds. In the tepidarium, the air is cooler, still damp. There is a faint trace of myrrh here, clinging to the drying cloths and stone benches. Someone had brought oil. Someone had laughed. Someone had leaned back, eyes closed, for a brief moment of quiet before returning to the world. Even in rest, the space holds the outlines of gestures. A damp handprint on the wall. A small pair of sandals forgotten beneath a bench, child-sized. Perhaps a girl too eager to leave, to chase after her mother, to remember them. Or perhaps she'll return tomorrow, and they will still be waiting. The servant kneels near the wall fountain and refills the small clay cup set beside it. No one will drink from it tonight. But the act itself is part of the rhythm, like smoothing a pillow no one will lie on. A gesture not for function, but for continuity. The bathhouse is not just a place of stone and water. It is a body. It breathes. It remembers. He pauses near the doorway, hand resting briefly against a fluted column. It is warmer here than in the outer halls. The stones hold on to the day's heat longer in this wing. Or perhaps it is something else, something left behind by the women who sat here, whispered here, existed here, even if only briefly and unrecorded. He does not disturb the comb. He does not fold the linen wrap. He does not wipe away the handprint on the wall. These things are not disorder. They are the last lines of a conversation. Instead, he dims his lamp slightly and moves on. The archway swallows him again. Behind him, the corridor waits in silence, untouched but not empty. The servant steps into a narrow passage that leads beneath the caldarium. Here, the floor slopes downwards, gently at first, then more steeply, until the polished marble gives way to rougher stone. The air shifts. It grows hotter, closer to the heat's origin. Beneath the beauty above, the heart of the bathhouse burns in silence. This is the hypocaust, the underfloor furnace system that breathes warmth into the walls and stones. A place most bathers never see. They feel its presence only in comfort, unaware of what labors below to give it. The corridor is low-ceilinged, lit only by the servant's small oil lamp. Shadows leap like startled birds along the soot-streaked walls. Rows of square brick pillars hold up the floor above, forming narrow channels. Between them, the glow of dying coals pulses softly, like embers inside a dragon's ribs. The fires have been banked now, less fuel, less flame. The bathhouse is closing, and with it, the furnace winds down into breathless hush. The servant kneels and checks the flue. He taps the side gently with a metal rod. Ash spills out, warm, dry, and fine as flour. He brushes it aside with the back of his hand. Beneath it, the stone is blackened, polished by years of heat. The smell here is old and intimate, carbon, oakwood, and time. He moves slowly, not wanting to wake the dust. Every now and then, he stops to listen, not for footsteps, but for creaks in the pipes, for the hiss of steam still lingering in the terracotta flues. The bathhouse is not dead yet. It exhales in small sounds. At the far end of the corridor, where the walls grow narrower, lies a pile of spent fuel, bundles of kindling, a broken amphora once used to carry olive oil, scraps of laurel branches. Some were used to scent the fire. Others simply burned. All have served their purpose. Above his head, he can hear faint echoes, stone shifting as it cools, droplets falling through unseen cracks, distant water settling into stillness. For centuries, the hypocaust has glowed unseen, like a buried sun. Now, tonight, it glows for the last time. In a small niche carved into the wall, he finds the old fire stoker's tools, tongs, a bellows, and a hook. None have moved in days. The last man to stoke the central furnace left 3 evenings ago. No one replaced him. The bathhouse is scheduled for closure. No public notice, just a quiet word passed from mouth to ear, like a rumor. One by one, the workers vanish, their tasks absorbed by fewer hands. The servant did not ask why. He simply stayed. He brushes soot from the wall with his sleeve and touches the rough groove where generations of fire-keepers placed their hands before bending to the coals. It is not a religious gesture, not quite. But there is reverence in it. When he turns to leave, he notices something he hadn't before, a child's drawing, scratched in charcoal onto the far wall. It's faded, nearly lost. 2 stick figures. One larger, one smaller. Holding hands. Both smiling. No names. No date. Just a moment etched in soot, preserved only because no one thought to clean it away. He pauses before the drawing, oil lamp raised. Then lowers it again. Better to leave it untouched. He climbs back up the corridor, back toward the fresher air. Behind him, the hypocaust glows faintly, quietly. Its breath slowing. He emerges slowly from the furnace corridor, blinking into the soft gloom of the caldarium. The warmth here is gentler now, no longer the heavy embrace it was an hour ago. The coals have done their duty, and the heat, like a breath long held, is beginning to exhale. The floor tiles are still warm beneath his sandals, but they no longer sting. The steam has grown thinner. It drifts in faint curls along the ceiling, catching the glow of the wall lamps. The room is empty now, save for a single towel left behind on a marble bench, damp and crumpled like forgotten parchment. Somewhere beyond the walls, night has deepened. Outside, Rome sleeps. But in here, something else has begun to still. He moves quietly, as if not to disturb the air. The sounds of laughter, splashing, and low conversation that once filled the space have all evaporated. There is only the sound of a single drop, falling again and again from the lip of the apse into the hot plunge pool, echoing like a whisper in an empty cathedral. He folds the towel carefully, more out of habit than need, and sets it upon a brass hook near the door. His fingers trace the carved lion head fountain, dry now. Once, water gushed from its mouth in a ceaseless arc. Now, only a faint mineral stain remains to mark where it flowed. In a quiet corner, a discarded sandal rests near the changing ledge. Just one. He picks it up, inspects it. Worn leather. A child's. Perhaps dropped in play, or forgotten in a moment of distraction. There is no one to claim it now. He places it gently on the bench beside the folded towel. The gesture feels ceremonial. A small act of remembrance. He walks through the tepidarium, then the frigidarium. Each room a little colder than the last, a little dimmer. The lamps flicker in their wall sconces, oil burning low. The flames seem to hesitate now, unsure whether to continue. He passes the apoditerium, the dressing room, its benches lined with dust. One of the cubbies holds a folded tunic, untouched. Another holds nothing but cobwebs. The air here smells faintly of old wool and lavender oil, a ghost of bodies long gone. Outside the door, the night air presses gently against the walls, cool and damp. He does not step out yet. Instead, he turns one last time to look across the great central hall. Shadows stretch long across the mosaic floor, curling between tiles like smoke. Above, the domed ceiling rises high into darkness, its painted stars barely visible in the lamplight. They were meant to remind bathers of the sky they were cut off from, to mimic the heavens while they bathed beneath stone. Now, they seem farther than ever. The servant exhales and lowers the flame of his lamp. One by one, he snuffs out the lights. With each flame extinguished, the bathhouse recedes further from the world. Until finally, only one light remains, his own. He carries it carefully through the empty rooms, past the pillars, past the memories caught in steam and marble, and into the night. As he closes the heavy wooden door behind him, the silence inside becomes total. The echoes stop. The heat fades. Only the faintest scent of smoke lingers in the stone, like breath held just a moment longer. The ember beneath the marble has gone dark. Long after the last visitor has gone, and long after the final coal has been stoked, the bathhouse does not rest. Not truly. It lingers, quietly. Like a dream that hasn't yet ended. Somewhere deep within the walls, a drip echoes. One drop, then another. Water, ancient and warm, finds its way through the cracks in the caldarium walls, carving threads no eye will see. The sound is almost human, a sigh behind stone. Outside, the streets of Rome are silent but not still. Torches gutter in their sconces along the alleyways, casting trembling orange pools onto cobbles slick with night dew. But within the bathhouse, the silence is heavier. Thicker. It wraps the interior like a woolen cloak. The air has changed. Cooler now. The heat clings in pockets, along the hypocaust channels, beneath the marble benches, behind the columns where air does not flow. These are the places where memories pool. The walls still bear the sheen of condensation. Steam curls gently where warmth still lingers in the tile seams. It moves like breath, slow, invisible, perpetual. In the corners of the frigidarium, where chill water has settled in still pools, thin threads of mist rise and fade again. They appear like spirits. Or perhaps they are. A small bronze vent, shaped like a lion's mouth, wheezes faintly as warm air escapes from deep underground. It sounds like breathing. It is the only noise now. Beneath the main hall, the hypocaust is beginning to cool. The pillars that hold the floor aloft, short, squat stacks of tile and brick, still radiate the day's fire, but they are losing it now, surrendering heat to the encroaching dark. If one were to lie here, ear pressed to the tile, they might hear the house sigh. A deep, low sound, as if stone itself were slumbering. High above, the dome traps the last warmth of day like a fading lantern. Its painted stars, gilded once with gold leaf, now seem dulled. But if the light catches just so, one might still see them wink, one by one, in the darkness. In the tepidarium, where voices once laughed and lingered, the benches remain occupied by shadows. They seem seated still, unmoved. Cloaks of steam drape over the curved armrests, then slip away, slow as memory. If you were to walk through now, you might feel a chill, not from cold, but from something else. Something listening. A row of brass oil lamps flickers faintly along the corridor wall. One has gone out. Another sputters. Their light bends against the tiled walls, casting long, thin silhouettes, stretched versions of pillars, basins, empty buckets, and silence itself. No footsteps fall here now. And yet, some part of the bathhouse waits. Not for visitors. Not even for morning. But for breath. For remembrance. The building remembers. Every footprint pressed into warm tile. Every laugh rising over steam. Every whispered conversation behind drawn curtains. The stones recall them all. And now, when the world outside is quietest, the walls begin to whisper them back, softly. There is a certain magic in repetition, especially in a place like this. The Roman bathhouse has seen thousands come and go, and in the stillness of the night, it begins to remember them, not as names. Not even as faces, but as impressions. Sensations. A pattern of heat left in the stone, like the echo of a footstep long since faded. A fingerprint in condensation. A laugh that once bounced from marble to mosaic. The building holds them not in memory, but in texture. Steam lingers where it always has, rising from the caldarium's emptied pools, slipping through the halls like a ghost of breath. In the triclinium adjoining the baths, where light snacks and honeyed wine were once served to men wrapped in damp towels, the benches are vacant. And yet, if you stood there long enough, you might feel warmth near the cushions where a senator once sat, discussing trade over fig cakes and olives. The walls have soaked it all in. Conversations. Arguments. Affairs. Gossip and gratitude. Murmurs in Greek and Latin and the softer tones of foreign tongues. They drifted upward with the vapor and were caught in the painted ceilings, where frescoed gods recline over scenes of riverbanks and shepherds. The ceiling hears more than most priests ever will. Tonight, there are no voices. And yet, if one listens closely, they might still hear the cadence of human talk, not words, exactly, but rhythm. The gentle rise and fall, like waves lapping against the tile. Steam clings to the ceiling's arch, then slides downward, tracing the curve of forgotten speech. In the women's section, once quieter but no less alive, echoes are stored differently. The walls remember the scratch of jewelry against stone, the swish of fabric wet at the hem, the peals of laughter exchanged over shared ointments and oils. A midwife once bathed here before attending a difficult birth. A widow bathed for the first time in mourning robes, and her tears fell unnoticed into warm water. The steam remembers these, too. Not with sadness, but with softness. There are no clocks in the bathhouse. No ticking or tolling of hours. Only the changing scent of the air, the cooling of the tile, and the deepening shadows that mark the passing of time. The night breathes slowly here. Each moment expands like steam, hangs in the air, then vanishes. In one dark alcove near the palestra, where men wrestled and stretched their limbs before soaking sore muscles, a single oil lamp has burned low. Its light dances across a worn inscription carved into the wall by a worker decades ago, 3 simple words in Latin, half erased by time and grime. No one knows the name. But the flame knows. It flickers over the carving with the gentleness of an old friend. Every basin, every marble seat, every drain carved with lion's teeth hold stories. Some are mundane, a man forgetting his sandal, a child splashing too loudly. Some are sacred, an oath sworn in hushed tones under curling clouds of steam. And some are secrets. Left here to fade, carried off only by the vapor that slips unseen into the night. And so the steam rises, again and again. It does not forget that it only waits. Long after the last patron has gone, and even the echoes have begun to settle, there is still someone who walks the halls. Not a senator, not a bather, not a servant in fresh linen, but a man whose name is written nowhere, and whose task is known only by the quiet floors he sweeps. The silent attendant. He moves with bare feet across the smooth stone, a reed broom in one hand, a small oil lamp in the other. His tunic is stained with ash and lye. His sandals lie unused by the door, he walks more quietly without them. The gods of the bathhouse know him well, though he never bows to them aloud. His offering is labor. His prayer is patience. He does not speak. Not out of vow, but from habit. There is no one to talk to now, and the steam does not demand answers. He simply works, wiping moisture from the stone benches, recentering a jar of oils knocked askew, gathering the last of the laurel leaves left beside the apoditirium benches. In one alcove, he kneels by the hypocaust's access channel, where the fire burned all day beneath the caldarium's floor. The embers are nearly cold. With practiced hands, he lifts the ash pan, tilts it into a clay urn, and seals it with a lid. The ashes will be used again, to scrub the tiles, to polish bronze. Nothing in this place is truly wasted. Not even fire. Sometimes he hums as he works. Softly, a low drone, more vibration than song. An old tune his mother sang while washing laundry in the Tiber. No words remain, only sound. The steam listens. It always does. On certain nights, he finds small treasures left behind, a bronze pin, a scrap of purple wool, the faint outline of a heel pressed into the clay dust. He places these aside in a wooden bowl beside the entry. Tomorrow, someone may return for them. Or not. Either way, they are safer in his care than in the dark. In the frigidarium, the water now stills, cold, black, reflective. He pauses to look into it. Not at himself, but at the ceiling above, mirrored perfectly in the pool, stars in mosaic, vines curling around dolphins, and between them, a fresco of Neptune riding a sea-horse. He has passed beneath this ceiling 1,000 times, but he never tires of its quiet majesty. The attendant knows every creak of the beams, every scent shift in the hallways, rosemary near the entrance, charcoal near the furnace, mildew in one shadowed corner that needs more light. He is not the architect, nor the owner. But he knows the bathhouse better than either. He has touched every stone with his hands, and the building knows him, too. It welcomes his weight when he leans against the wall in weariness. It holds the warmth of his lamp as he rests it beside him. When he stumbles slightly, his hips stiff from years of bending, the threshold rises just enough to catch him gently. He is not a ghost. He is not a memory. He is the keeper of all that lingers when everyone else forgets. Tonight, like every night, he will finish just before dawn. He will sweep the last of the fallen petals near the tepidarium's bench. He will draw the wooden curtain closed behind him. And he will nod once to the great bronze face carved above the entrance, a silent salute between two guardians of steam and time. No one sees him leave. No one ever does. Beneath the smooth tessellated marble, beneath the sandal-worn walkways and columns veiled in mist, lies another world. A world of fire and brick and sweat. Here, in the vaulted underbelly of the bathhouse, the hypocaust breathes. It exhales warmth through the pillars of hollow tile and stone, through the raised floors that cradle the caldarium above. And within this sweltering maze, cramped, smoky, unadorned, move the men of ash, the stoker boys. They are not slaves, not anymore. Some were born into service, sons of stokers before them. Others are freedmen, once bound, now simply poor. Their world is not the clean gleam of marble, but the furnace room's soot and red heat. Caius, the oldest, crouches by the main vent. His face is lined, though he is only 30. Years of smoke have etched permanent shadows under his eyes. He feeds the fire with a rhythm that is almost gentle. Not tossing the logs, but placing them. Feeding the dragon, not waking it. The wood they use is olive and pine, brought in bundles from the portico each morning. They burn slower than cypress, more evenly than laurel. Each type leaves its own scent and smoke color, knowledge passed down, not written, but remembered in the lungs and fingertips. Beside him, a boy no older than 12 wipes his forehead with a sleeve already blackened with ash. He hands another billet to Caius, careful not to step too close. The stones are hot enough to cook flesh. And they have. The boy knows this. He's seen it happen. Above them, they hear footsteps, faint echoes of sandals in the tepidarium. The fire's breath reaches upward, unseen, warming stone benches, drying walls, softening skin. The bathers above never think of what lies below. Nor should they. That is the purpose of the stoker, to remain invisible, even in flame. At intervals, Caius rises and makes his rounds with an iron poker, tapping along the low brick tunnels. He listens to the tone of each tap. Hollow means clear. Dull means soot build up. If too much ash gathers, the smoke will choke and backdraft into the floor above. It has happened before, in a rival bathhouse down the road. A woman fainted in the caldarium. The cause was traced not to curse or plague, but neglect in the furnace belly. Not here. Not under Caius's watch. He opens a vent shaft with care. The rush of heat is like breath against his face, dry, sharp, biting. He peers into the opening with the narrow light of a resin torch. The flue is clear. Good. He closes it again, sealing it with a bronze bolt that hisses against the hot frame. Somewhere far above, a faint splash echoes downward. Laughter follows. Then silence. Just the crackle of pine resin, the scrape of tongs, the slow rhythm of breath in a place too warm for words. Here, names are short. Work is long. The men of ash keep no ledgers, sign no scrolls, wear no rings. Their skin is darkened not by birth but by smoke. Their nails are lined with soot, their arms calloused from lifting, stacking, hauling, burning, yet without them, the bathhouse is only stone. Cold, empty, lifeless. At the end of each shift, Caius brushes a hand across the side of the furnace, a gesture as habitual as a priest's benediction. His palm collects a fine layer of gray. He wipes it on his tunic without a second thought. No one thanks them. No one sees them. But when the marble above glows warm and the air smells faintly of pine and salt, their work speaks for itself. And as Caius prepares the final load of wood for the night, the fire accepts his offering without protest. The embers stir, the warmth rises, and above, the bathhouse dreams. By this hour, most of the public had departed, their footprints fading into the warm stones of the floor like vapor on glass. The bathhouse breathed differently now, quieter, slower. A faint echo of dripping water kept time like a metronome in a forgotten melody. Only a few lingered, scattered like loose threads, an older merchant who reclined with his robe draped over his knees, a young mother rubbing fragrant oil into her forearm, her child dozing against the edge of a bench. The noise of the day had softened into small rituals, the creak of wooden sandals, the clink of a dropped coin, the murmur of a final conversation. Cassius, now dry and wrapped in a thin linen cloak, leaned against a marble column in the apoditerium, watching his breath catch the torchlight. Behind him, the cloakroom attendant moved with practiced stillness, sorting sandals and tunics into their niches, careful not to disturb the hush that had settled like evening dust. Near the southern end of the hall, a servant extinguished a brass oil lamp, and a veil of shadow rolled over the wall mosaics. Candles were left burning low in strategic corners, not for light, but for mood. These were not the flames of function, but of comfort. They invited reflection. A rustle of cloth to Cassius's left drew his eye. An elderly man, bearded and stooped, was carefully unrolling a scroll. Not parchment, papyrus, with ink worn by time and salt air. He read in silence, lips barely moving, his expression one of reverence rather than concentration. He might have been reading poetry. He might have been praying. In that moment, it was impossible to tell the difference. Cassius was not alone in noticing. A young man nearby, barefoot, freckled, perhaps a student, stared unabashedly at the elder, as though trying to read the words over his shoulder. After a moment, the old man looked up, met his gaze, and smiled, not an invitation, but an acknowledgement. They held each other's gaze just long enough to say, "Yes, this too is part of the bath's purpose." The water was long behind them, but its effects lingered: soft skin, loose muscles, a stilled mind. This was the time when thoughts stretched their legs, when the city outside became dim and distant, when the mind wandered down its own mosaic corridors. Cassius stood and moved to the edge of the changing area. A basin of cool rosewater awaited those who wished for final refreshment before stepping back into the world. He dipped his hands, feeling the crisp contrast against skin still warm from the caldarium. He dabbed the scent at his wrists and temples, more gesture than need. In the stillness, even a drop of water felt ceremonial. Outside, the night had deepened. Somewhere far off, a street performer plucked at a cithara, his voice low and unhurried, like someone singing to himself more than to any audience. The sound found its way through the walls, faint as a dream. Cassius lingered at the doorway. He looked back once more, at the golden flickers, the reclining bodies, the steam that still curled like incense from unseen corners. Then he stepped beyond the threshold, into the air of the Roman night. The bathhouse did not follow him. It stayed behind like a sacred flame, quiet, glowing, and eternal. The night air clung softly to Cassius's skin as he stepped out from the baths. It had cooled since sundown, but the stones beneath his sandals still held the memory of the sun. Overhead, the stars emerged one by one, cautious at first, like timid guests to a gathering, before spilling across the sky in full celestial procession. The streets near the Thermae of Agrippa were quieter now, save for the rhythmic sweep of a broom in a shop alcove, or the slow creak of a cart's wheel in the distance. Rome after twilight held a different tempo, less declarative, more murmured. Every step echoed a little longer. Every movement carried a faint reverence, as though one were walking through a dream half-remembered. Cassius walked with no particular haste. The bathhouse had rinsed more than sweat from him, it had softened the edges of his thoughts. He felt unmoored from time, neither bound to the duties of the day nor the promises of tomorrow. The warm scent of his skin mingled with rose oil and cedar, and he inhaled deeply as though the breath alone might prolong the serenity. A narrow alley led him away from the main road, one of those secretive veins of the city where time seemed slower. Here, oil lamps burned from iron hooks, their flickering flames catching on polished marble columns and terracotta brick. He passed a vine-covered wall where two cats sat silently like twin sphinxes, tails curled, their golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. Not far ahead, a doorway stood open, its cloth curtain swaying gently in the breeze. From within came the low cadence of voices, measured, thoughtful, like a poem being recited to a patient listener. Cassius paused. He recognized the sound, not just as conversation, but as philos, the gentle dialogue shared by those who knew how to linger with words. He stepped into the tablinum without announcing himself. No one looked up. The room was small, lined with shelves of scrolls and small busts of stern-faced men, Cicero, Seneca, and Epictetus. Four figures reclined on cushions around a brass lamp. A jug of honeyed wine rested at the center, untouched for now, as though the discourse itself had proved more nourishing. One of the men, bald, with olive-dark skin and the bearing of someone used to stillness, was speaking. And what is contentment, if not the ability to want less, not more? A younger man across from him gave a faint nod. But is that withdrawal, or wisdom? Cassius didn't enter the circle but leaned quietly against a pillar, unseen but not unwelcome. He'd listened to these dialogues before, wandering into such rooms was not uncommon in this district. This was Rome's quieter pulse, the one not found in circuses or forums, but in tucked-away rooms where knowledge passed not through proclamations, but through listening. As the discussion unfurled, voices braided with ease, no interruptions, no shouts. It was as if each man's words had been soaked in warm water before being spoken. There was something sacred about this rhythm, this willingness to speak and be spoken to. It reminded Cassius of the baths again, not the heat or the water, but the space it created for inward turning. Outside, the cats still watched. Inside, the lamp sputtered slightly, throwing long shadows up the wall where the bust of Cicero stared down with eternal contemplation. Cassius felt no need to speak. He simply breathed, letting the words pass through him like a breeze between curtains. In a world always spinning, always demanding, this moment, this stillness, was a kind of resistance. A pause between heartbeats. A sacred ember of its own. In another part of the bathhouse complex, beneath the vaulted caldarium and marble grandeur, a narrow passage curved like an artery behind the walls. Few patrons ever saw it. It was dim, low-ceilinged, and lined with baskets, tools, and the musky scent of oil and cloth. This was where the true heartbeat of the baths pulsed, the domain of the slaves. Here, The air was heavy with steam and labor, but laughter found its way in too, quiet, clipped, cautious laughter, passed between workers like a crumb of stolen bread. A boy no older than 12 darted past carrying folded linen stacked twice his height, his bare feet slapping softly on the stone. An older man, stooped and gray-haired, guided a copper pot of coals down the corridor, the heat from it warming the cold wall as he passed. They rarely spoke above a whisper. But even in silence, there was rhythm. A language of movement, of glance and gesture. One hand offered a towel, another caught it mid-air. A hiss from a nearby brazier, a muttered count of jars, the soft hum of someone wiping down a tile wall. This, too, was Rome. Felix, a young man with shoulders broad from years of lifting amphorae, paused to stretch his back. His tunic was damp and stuck to his chest, but he did not seem to notice. His task now was to refill the perfume jars in the apodyterium, where senators and merchants would anoint themselves with saffron, rose, or frankincense. He selected the correct blends, he always remembered who preferred what. He knew Senator Rufus abhorred rose and always asked for laurel. He knew the older Greek poet who bathed weekly preferred olive oil, unperfumed, and that the young equestrian who arrived just after sunset liked his towels warm and lemon-scented. Felix had a mind like a shelf of scrolls, ordered, reliable, quick. But his expression was distant as he worked, his fingers moving with practiced care. He was thinking, not of oils or towels, but of home, a village beyond Ostia, near where the Tyrrhenian sea lapped at craggy rocks. He hadn't seen it since he was sold at 13. He wondered if the olive trees there still leaned the same way in the wind. A soft clatter pulled him back. One of the boys had dropped a jar. It did not break, but the sound cracked the silence, and the older slaves froze, just for a breath. Then all resumed as before, as if silence itself had gathered the shards. Nearby, Amara, one of the laundresses, wrung out a tunic into a basin, her fingers raw from lye soap. She had worked in the bathhouse longer than most of the men here and could balance 4 baskets of towels on her shoulders. Her arms were strong, her expression unreadable, but her voice, when she did speak, was warm with memory. Sometimes she hummed to herself as she worked, a lullaby in a tongue no one else here understood. She looked over at Felix and gave the faintest nod. It was the closest they ever came to conversation, yet it was enough. In a place where time did not belong to you, such gestures were a kind of speech. Above them, the walls vibrated faintly with the footfalls of the bathers. Voices echoed through the pipes, distorted and watery. Somewhere in the caldarium, someone laughed, high, bright, clean. That sound never reached the slave corridor unchanged. It arrived muffled, ghost-like, a strange reminder of the world above. Felix lifted the small wooden tray of perfumes and moved again, steady and silent. And as the lamp above him flickered in the steam, he walked back into the shadows of the corridor, a shadow among shadows, carrying the scent of roses into a world where none bloomed. A low splash echoed through the bathhouse, delicate as a flute note dropped in a vast hall. The tepidarium, with its warm air and amber light, was still filling with evening guests. Soft conversation lilted through the room, layered with the gentle sound of water moving against marble. Most bathers moved slowly now, their skin flushed from the caldarium's embrace. They rested, lingered, or reclined against the edge of the bath, soaking in the warmth like cats in sunlight. But among the patterned tiles near the edge, a boy crouched low, his brow furrowed, his hand skimming the water. Lucius. He was no one's son here. Perhaps 12, perhaps younger. His tunic was damp at the hem, clinging to his knees as he searched along the bath's bottom. The water reached only to his elbows, but he was soaked from shoulder to shin. The cause of his urgency, a single as, a bronze coin, had slipped from a bather's robe, vanished into the watery mosaic below. He had seen it fall. And now, he hunted. The bather, an elderly man with a wide paunch and pale, creased skin, paid him no attention. He had dropped the coin without even noticing. For Lucius, it was different. A single coin meant an extra piece of bread. A fig, if he dared dream. Maybe even a wool scrap to patch the hole in his sleeping mat. Other patrons ignored him. He was part of the scenery, like the warm walls and the hum of pipes. But Lucius moved carefully. He did not wish to disturb. His bare feet whispered over the tiles, and he plunged his hand down again, sifting through warm water and dim reflections. Still nothing. A woman in a linen wrap watched him idly between sips of warm spiced wine. She said nothing, only noted his presence the way one might note a draft or a distant bird call. Harmless, forgettable. Nearby, the light from the lanterns played upon the surface of the water. Every flicker cast false shadows across the bath's floor. Lucius blinked hard, eyes straining. For a moment, he thought he saw it, a glint near the base of a lion-head spout. He moved quickly but with silent care, sliding across the smooth stone. Yes. There, nestled between two tiles, barely visible, a dull shimmer in the shape of a coin. He reached, fingertips brushing the bottom. And then, just as he touched it, the water stirred. A man stepped into the pool beside him, sending a ripple across the surface. Lucius stumbled back, breath caught, the coin skidding just out of reach again. The man, wrapped in a towel around his waist, glanced down at him briefly. "Careful," he said, not unkindly, and then moved on. Lucius steadied himself. Waited. Then reached once more. This time, his fingers closed around it. The coin was cool from the water and heavier than it looked. He turned it over quickly in his palm, just once, to confirm the profile of the emperor stamped upon it, then tucked it into the fold of his tunic. He stood, water dripping from his sleeves, and moved back into the edge of the room, where the servants and errand boys lingered. No one questioned him. He had become part of the walls again. Outside the tepidarium, in the corridor between the furnace rooms and the exit halls, he paused to check that no one followed. Then he crouched again, carefully pulling a small clay shard from behind a wall joint, his hiding spot. Within it, 2 other coins, worn nearly smooth. This new one he added with care. He didn't know what he was saving for. A meal, a journey, a gift. Perhaps just the idea of enough. Of one day, not needing to search. He pressed the shard back into place, brushed water from his tunic, and slipped away. Back inside, the bathers spoke in low tones, oblivious. Lanterns danced over the water's skin. The surface was still again. The coin, the boy, the search, vanished like breath in steam. Beyond the tepidarium, the steam began to thin. Walls once slick with condensation now bore a gentler sheen, and the sound of water quieted into stillness. The path curved inward to a narrower room, less open, more secretive. It was not a place for soaking, nor scrubbing, nor plunging. It was a place for words. The laconicum, the dry heat chamber, breathed a different rhythm than the others. It hummed in silence, thick and dense, its warmth not from water but from air itself. Dry as desert wind, the heat coiled around the skin, urging sweat from the pores and slowing every motion into a thoughtful pace. Few ventured here long. Fewer spoke while inside, but when they did, they whispered. The chamber was small, its walls curved and domed, enclosing those within in a womb of heat and shadow. Only a small oculus in the ceiling allowed the faintest breath of night air to stir the space. Light came from a single lamp, its wick flickering low in its bronze dish. Shadows clung to the curves like dust in a forgotten tomb. Inside, two men sat opposite one another, each wrapped in the thinnest linen. Their foreheads glistened. Their eyes, half-lidded. Between them, a silence stretched. Not uncomfortable. Not hesitant. Measured. One spoke first. "Did you hear of the fire in the Velabrum?" The second man, younger, his voice like rough papyrus, nodded. "A bakery, wasn't it? And 3 shops beside it. A shame. The bread was good there." The first man leaned back, the stone behind him warm against his spine. "They say it started in the grain storeroom. Too much chaff. Too little caution. They always say that." The room shifted, expanded with the silence that followed. The heat pressed in, not oppressive, but insistent. A weight without anger. Then another whisper. "I saw Marcus Rufus here earlier." "Did you?" A soft rustle as the younger man adjusted his wrap. "No. I heard he left early." The older man closed his eyes. He looked thinner. And pale. "His brother died last week." Dysentery, or debt? Another silence. This was the nature of the Laconicum. Not the clamor of the Caldarium, nor the idleness of the Tepidarium. Here, the walls themselves were confidants. Secrets curled in the corners, wrapped in heat and hush. What was said was often less than what was meant. A third figure entered, an older woman, her face lined like fine linen folds. She stepped with care, a towel folded across her arm, her breathing deliberate. The men did not greet her. There was no need. She sat down beside the wall, closed her eyes, and listened to the silence. This was the hour for it. When bodies were softened, guards lowered. Here, philosophers once spoke of the soul as heat escaping the flesh. Soldiers confessed fears no blade could draw out. Lovers traded glances that would never pass beyond these walls. The woman spoke now, her voice papery but certain. "My daughter sent word from Massilia. She says it is cold there still." The men made small sounds of acknowledgement. Not of dismissal, of belonging. Her words, though not addressed to them, had joined the chamber. "I remember the sea there," the younger man murmured. "It smells different." "Salt and fish," the older replied. "Here, it's brick and smoke." "And sweat." A quiet chuckle passed through them, like wind over coals. The woman opened her eyes. "Still, she writes to me. I had thought she would forget." "She hasn't," said the younger man. "Not yet," said the elder. Time was different in the Laconicum. It folded, melted, drifted. A few minutes could become a memory. A word could become a companion. Here, you did not speak unless you meant it. And if you did not speak, no one would demand it. They sat together a while longer, and when the heat became too heavy, they rose in turn and departed without farewell. Outside the door, the cooler air felt sharp and cleansing. The silence of the chamber clung to their skin like steam. Back inside, the single lamp flickered, then steadied. The whispering room was empty again, but it had listened. And would listen again. The furnace was an ever-hungry beast. Beneath the tiled floors of the caldarium, deep within the bowels of the bathhouse, crouched a man with soot along his arms and sweat along his brow. His name was Cassianus, the Hypocausterius, the fire-keeper, unseen by most, unthought of by many, and yet entirely essential to the illusion of comfort and opulence above. The floor above him shimmered with heat, its smooth stone tiles warmed the feet of senators and merchants, and its walls held the foggy echoes of laughter and business. But here, where few ever walked, there was no laughter. Only the dull roar of the flames and the rattle of fire tools, the hush of ash shifting with every movement. Cassianus had worked the furnace since he was 16, when his father, also a Hypocausterius, fell ill and never recovered. It was not a job many envied. You crawled, crouched, and burned your knees. You inhaled smoke. You learned the rhythm of wood and heat. You became as much a part of the system as the stone arches or clay flues. But it was quiet down here. And in that silence, Cassianus had learned to think. He fed the beast with split olive logs and mulberry. The fire roared higher, licking the underbellies of the raised floors, and steam hissed upward into the room where bathers sat and sweated, never knowing who stoked their comfort. He paused only to sip from a flask of lukewarm water, wiping his brow with a cloth already blackened at the edges. Over the years, he had come to read the moods of the furnace. The way it hissed when the air was too damp. The way it sulked when the logs were green. Tonight, it was temperamental. The wind had shifted from the Tiber, and the fire dragged toward the eastern vent. He adjusted the dampers accordingly, muttering to himself in the half-light. Above, in the caldarium, slaves ladled warm water into shallow basins. The floors radiated a luxurious warmth. Men debated politics and praised poets while lounging half-naked against mosaicked benches. No one thought of the smoke that curled up unseen. No one thought of the soot. Cassianus smiled, grimly. It had always been this way, the unseen hands made the pleasures possible. Like the kitchen slaves at the feast, or the scribes in the library, or the seamstresses in the atrium. Without them, the empire's illusion of order would falter like a cooling flame. The fire snapped suddenly, sending up a spark that drifted into the dark. Cassianus stared at it for a moment, then shifted another log into place. The wood hissed, then caught. The light flickered across the low tunnel walls, casting his shadow long and warped. He didn't mind the heat anymore. It had become a second skin. His tunic clung damply to his back, but he worked without pause. The night was far from over, and the bathhouse would not rest until the last citizen had gone home, steamed and soothed, glowing from warmth they never questioned. A small crack echoed above, perhaps a dropped amphora, or a clumsy step. Cassianus didn't look up. He couldn't see the marble ceilings or the painted frescoes. But he knew the building by its breathing, its creaks and sighs. He knew it better than the architects who had laid its bricks. Outside, the sky darkened further. The stars blinked behind distant clouds. Inside, the bathhouse glowed softly from within, like a lantern cupped in the city's hand. And under it all, deep in the heated belly of Rome, Cassianus kept the ember alive. It began not with a tremor, nor a scream, nor any great spectacle, but with a small, almost imperceptible shift. The steam in the caldarium, thick and curling like the breath of the gods, suddenly moved differently, less like a swirl and more like a retreat. The air, moments ago soft and slow, grew restless. Not cooler, not yet, but alert, as though the stones themselves had paused to listen. Lelia, seated by the edge of the heated basin, paused in her quiet washing. Her fingers, wrapped around a soft linen cloth, stilled against her shoulder. The water no longer lapped gently against the tiled lip of the pool, it waited. It felt like the moment between the drawing of a curtain and the first note of a performance. An inhalation. Across from her, two older matrons chatted in hushed tones, their voices bouncing off the curved marble dome overhead. Their conversation meandered from recipes to rumors, never touching the edge of awareness. But Lelia felt it. Something about the stillness now seemed unnatural. It was the way the air had changed scent. Fainter, yes, but tinged with something metallic and sour beneath the layered fragrance of rose oil and warming terracotta. The women would say the heat had simply stirred up the old mortar, that the copper piping had begun to sweat. But Lelia had spent her life in spaces like these. This was different. She rose, slowly, allowing the water to stream from her arms and legs like shed silk. As she reached for her towel, a sudden hush overtook the chamber, so sudden and complete it silenced even the dripping of the condensation from the ceiling. Then, there it was. A sound. Not close, but deep. A low, grinding murmur. Not loud enough to be remarked upon by the chattering patrons, but loud enough to disturb the pigeons resting on the rooftop oculus. Feathers flurried briefly overhead. Lelia turned to glance at the doorway. The slave girl who had earlier brought more oil was gone, likely called away to refill flasks or sweep another corridor. But even the sound of footsteps, normally so constant, so unimportant, had vanished. The corridor outside seemed to stretch on, silent and unmoving. She stepped onto the mosaic floor, the warm tiles grounding her. Her skin, still flushed from the caldarium's embrace, prickled now with a strange awareness. Not fear. Not yet. But something beneath it, like a pebble buried under a silk cushion. From behind her, a voice broke the silence. You heard that too. It was spoken softly, by an elderly woman half-wrapped in her drying robe, perched on a marble bench near the herbs and ointments. Her gaze was sharp beneath her relaxed exterior. Lelia nodded. It came from below. The earth speaks, the woman replied, tone flat. It has done so before. A pause stretched between them. The silence returned. Lelia thought of the fire keeper, Cassianus. She thought his name might be, crouched beneath them even now, tending the ever-hungry flames. Would he have heard the same sound, but louder? Would he have paused mid-motion, one soot-slick hand resting on a coal scoop, wondering if the ceiling would hold? And what about the water system, so delicately balanced with its channels and cisterns? A tremor deep enough to rumble could disrupt more than just the caldarium. It could bring stagnation to the frigidarium, overflows in the natatio, pressure bursts from the bronze taps. Still, Lelia moved without panic. Her steps were measured, her expression calm, her hands wrapping the towel loosely around her hair. She had lived in Rome too long to jump at every shift. Earth murmurs were not uncommon. The old city was built on layers, of stone, of memory, of buried things. Sometimes the past simply stirred. She returned to her wooden sandals and stepped toward the tepidarium, where warmth still hung in layers and patrons dozed against the soft-lighted walls. Behind her, the caldarium resumed its breathing, the steam curling again, the water gently disturbed by a newcomer's entrance. It was as though nothing had happened at all, but Lelia knew better. There was a tension in the stone now. A quiet tautness beneath the splendor. And above it all, in the frescoed dome where gods reclined on painted clouds and dolphins leapt across imaginary seas, a tiny flake of paint drifted down from Jupiter's forehead, and landed in silence on the edge of the steaming pool. The sudatorium, or steam room, was not the first place one would expect to find clarity, but here, wrapped in layers of mist and heat, time often folded in on itself. As Hadrian stepped inside, his footfalls softened against the damp marble floor, each step absorbed by the warm air and the steady hissing of water cascading over heated stones. The steam pressed close to his skin, a tangible weight that slowed his breath and quieted his thoughts. The walls, once crisp and tessellated in mosaic scenes of nereids and dolphins, were now blurred into ghostly outlines. A few figures emerged slowly from the haze, patrons seated on low benches, their limbs glistening with perspiration, some in contemplation, others in whispered conversation. Hadrian found an open place along the curved wall, beside a man whose head rested back against the tile, eyes closed, lips slightly parted in a sigh of contentment. No names were exchanged. That was the way of it here. The steam was democratic, veiling status and intention alike. As the heat swelled, Hadrian's mind wandered, not to business or family, but to memory. The scent of eucalyptus leaves, sometimes tossed on the stones, reminded him of the countryside near Tiber, where he once climbed trees as a boy. There, too, heat shimmered in the summer air. But it was drier, lighter. The steam here was maternal, enveloping, relentless in its embrace. Near the center of the room, an attendant stepped silently from the haze with a bronze bucket. He poured water slowly over a mound of blackened stones, unleashing a furious sizzle and a fresh wave of heat. The mist thickened, wrapping around shoulders and limbs, obscuring even the lantern's faint glow in the corner. A woman's laugh, low, amused, and unhurried, drifted through the air, followed by a hush of voices. She sat at the far side, her form softened by the vapor, her hair pinned in the high, looping style worn by freed women who had earned their independence. A freed woman in the sudatorium was no longer defined by her past but by her breath, her body, her place here. Everyone was rendered equal by the steam. The man beside Hadrian stirred. "Do you know," he murmured, "that Emperor Hadrian himself once sat in a room like this, in Antioch, and declared the steam a god?" Hadrian gave a faint smile but said nothing. The steam often loosened not just the pores but the tongue. Tales flowed freely, detached from their need for proof. Another hiss of water on stone. Another wave of warmth, like a hand passing gently over the skin. Hadrian leaned back, closing his eyes. In the muffled silence, the world shrank to a heartbeat, to the sound of breath, to the languid drip of condensation tracing paths down stone columns. Here, in this room of heat and shadow, the scribe, the baker, the merchant, and the former slave sat shoulder to shoulder. No toga, no ring, no scroll distinguished them. Only the rhythm of their breath and the quiet trust that no word spoken here would follow them out into the moonlight. Outside, the city still bustled. The forums echoed with late bargains, the taverns sang with drink. But inside the sudatorium, it was the age-old language of water and warmth that reigned, where memory softened, and the spirit became pliable once more. The bathhouse held its breath, and so did they. Hadrian lingered longer than he had meant to. The sudatorium had slowed his pulse, softened the brittle edges of the day. When at last he stepped back into the corridor, the air outside struck him as surprisingly cool, though it was still warm by any ordinary measure. His skin glistened, dew-like, from the heat, and each movement now felt more deliberate, like waking from a long, dense dream. The corridor ahead sloped gently upward, a short walk toward the Laconicum, the dry heat room where silence reigned more rigidly than anywhere else in the complex. He paused near a stone fountain nestled in a niche. From the sculpted mouth of a lion's head, water trickled softly into a small basin, more a murmur than a splash. Hadrian cupped his hand, drank, and held the rest to his face, watching it slip through his fingers like something too precious to keep. Here, between chambers, he could hear the building itself, a language not spoken but breathed. The low creak of timber in the ceiling beams, the faint hum from beneath the floor where furnaces roared with carefully fed flame. The hypocaust, that miraculous underworld of fire and air, warmed every slab beneath their feet. Slaves tended those fires, silent, unseen. The lifeblood of this place flowed because of them. He turned a corner and paused. Set into the wall ahead was a blackened plaque of volcanic stone, basalt, perhaps, carved faintly with words in Latin and Greek. The letters were worn by decades of touch and time. It was not a public notice, nor an imperial decree, but a verse. Heat purifies the skin, silence purifies the heart. Hadrian raised his hand and brushed his fingers across the words. How many others had done the same? Hundreds, perhaps. Thousands. Senators, beggars, merchants, lovers. All had passed this way, reading these lines as the heat loosened their bones and time blurred at the edges. He wondered who had first chosen to carve it there. A magistrate? A Stoic philosopher? Or simply a builder, weary from lifting stones, who had paused to offer something quietly eternal? The Laconicum was close now. Its doorway was marked not by grandeur but by stillness. As Hadrian stepped through, he was greeted not by greeting or glance, but by silence, the kind that feels as though it has been sitting in the air for centuries, waiting patiently for new occupants to join it. The room was octagonal, domed, its walls bare but for the curved ridges where condensation gathered. There were no mosaics, no voices, no ornament. Only the simple bench of smooth marble and the hush of breathing. Dry heat enveloped the body here, without the bloom of steam or the chatter of attendants. It was not a place for talk. Hadrian sat slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet. Across from him, an old man sat with eyes half-lidded. Beside him, a young girl no older than 12, perhaps his granddaughter. She mimicked his posture with surprising precision, hands resting on her knees, spine straight, her dark hair tied back with a cord of red wool. The heat here was different. It pressed inward but did not smother. One's thoughts became audible, even loud. The mind, now free of words and sound, offered up images from the past, a wife's smile in candlelight, a road once walked at dusk, a letter never answered. Hadrian closed his eyes. He saw the Forum at dawn, wet with dew. He heard the clatter of hooves in a narrow alley, smelled baked figs in a sun-warmed tray. He felt, too, the ache in his shoulder from a long-forgotten fall. Time collapsed again. Not in pain, nor in joy, but in weightlessness. A kind of surrender. The girl beside her grandfather exhaled softly, as if she, too, had reached a place of understanding that required no explanation. Hadrian did not speak. There was nothing to add, only the warmth of stone. And the stones, in turn, remembered everything. Hadrian rose slowly from the marble bench, every joint loose, every motion measured. He offered a respectful nod toward the elder and the girl, who still sat in their shared silence. Neither stirred to acknowledge him, but there was no need. In the Laconicum, understanding traveled without words. He stepped lightly across the warm floor and passed through the archway once more, leaving behind the dry hush for the cooling corridor. Now, his destination was the Frigidarium, the final chamber in the ritual, where cold water and night air awaited. The corridor twisted gently, lit now by low-burning oil lamps tucked into niches along the wall. Their golden flames wavered faintly, casting looping shadows across the pale plaster. It was nearing the 10th hour of the night, and the bathhouse had thinned. Voices were fewer. Footsteps more scattered. Stillness began to settle, not as emptiness, but as contentment. Before the cold plunge, however, there was a pause, the in-between space. Hadrian stepped through a narrow colonnade that opened into a small enclosed garden nestled deep within the building's heart. The air shifted as he entered. Cooler. Still moist, but touched by night's breath. This was the Viridarium, a pocket of greenery sheltered within stone. Slender cypress trees rose like sentinels beside neat rows of lavender, thyme, and myrtle. The plants thrived in the heat that filtered up from the hypocaust, but the garden was open to the sky, and the stars peered gently down through the narrow rectangle above. Hadrian walked barefoot across a mosaic path, small tiles of sky blue and sea green that formed winding patterns like streams. His feet brushed against scattered petals. Someone had passed earlier and left behind a sprig of rosemary, its scent now mingling with the warm earth and ancient brick. In the center stood a small pool, oval-shaped, fed by a trickle of chilled water that had been drawn from the city's aqueducts. It was not the plunge basin that lay beyond, but rather a place to pause, to breathe in the scent of growing things before the chill swept over the body. Hadrian knelt by the pool and let his fingers trail lightly through the water. Tiny ripples shimmered under starlight. He cupped a handful and pressed it to the back of his neck, shivering slightly. The contrast to the dry heat of the Laconicum was sharp but bracing, like awakening gently from sleep. A soft rustle drew his gaze to the far corner of the garden. A young man, wrapped in a linen towel, sat on a bench beneath a fig tree. His eyes were closed, and his head tilted slightly back toward the stars. Hadrian recognized the stillness in him, the kind born not of exhaustion but of peace, that rare and fleeting state when the world no longer presses. Behind the garden, through an arched doorway framed by ivy, the sounds of running water grew stronger. The frigidarium was close now. But still, Hadrian lingered. His gaze drifted to a nearby wall, where a climbing vine had crept over an old inscription carved into the plaster. He gently moved a leaf aside. The words, though weathered, were still clear. Here, the soul exhales. Let it do so without fear. He traced the final letter with a thumb, then let the leaf fall back into place. He sat on the low stone rim of the pool and inhaled deeply. The lavender was strongest here. Beneath it, the cool scent of wet stone and clay. Beyond, something faintly metallic, the unmistakable smell of cold bronze basins and the plunge that awaited. Somewhere nearby, a lyre played softly. Someone, perhaps a slave, perhaps a bather delaying sleep, strummed a slow melody that wandered without urgency, like a river unsure of its course. The notes slipped into the garden and stayed there, barely touching the ground. Hadrian closed his eyes and let the music settle into him. Here, in the garden between warmth and cold, between light and darkness, the body rested. Not asleep. Not yet. But ready. At last, Hadrian stood, refreshed by the garden's breath. He passed beneath the ivy-laced arch and followed the cool stone path that curved gently toward the final chamber. Each step brought a hush, a quiet anticipation that pressed lightly on the skin like dew. Ahead, the doorway of the frigidarium rose before him, taller than the others, lined with pale travertine that caught and reflected the lantern glow like faint moonlight. As he stepped inside, the air changed all at once. Not the warmth of steam, nor the stillness of dry heat, but a clear, bracing chill that reached down into the lungs and demanded a deeper breath. The room was spacious, circular, and calm. At its heart lay the cold plunge pool, wide and deep, lined in white marble with greenish-blue veins that looked like frozen rivers. Thin columns surrounded it, each carved in the Doric style, framing the water like the columns of a forgotten temple. Light shimmered from bronze sconces set into the curved walls, their flames steady in the unmoving air. The reflected firelight danced across the surface of the pool, trembling over the ceiling in ripples of gold and silver. There were others here, though fewer now than before. A quiet man with damp hair stood waist-deep in the water, arms folded across his chest, eyes closed as he acclimated to the chill. A pair of teenage boys, whispering and laughing softly, had just taken the plunge, their slick heads emerging in tandem, teeth chattering as they scrambled up the marble steps, all performance and pride. In the corner, an older woman, an attendant, perhaps, sat on a wooden stool, watching with a kind of detached kindness, a folded woolen cloak across her knees. Hadrian lingered at the edge of the pool, placing a hand on the cool marble railing. He had done this 1,000 times before, and yet it always required the same small act of courage, a yielding to the cold, a letting go. He took in one long breath, and then stepped down, foot by foot, into the water. The chill wrapped around his ankles first, then his shins, his knees, his hips. Each level brought a sharp gasp that he welcomed. It was a breath that cleared the senses, a memory of mountain springs and childhood rivers. When he reached the last step, he let go fully and dropped beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. The water surrounded him completely, cool, still, absolute. He floated beneath the surface, eyes closed, hearing nothing but the faint thunder of his own heartbeat echoing inside his ears. The world was muffled and lightless. There was no past, no heat, no city beyond. Only the purity of cold. He rose slowly, his head breaking the surface with barely a ripple. His breath came quick and sharp, then steadied. Around him, the room seemed farther away now. The columns more distant, the torches dimmer. But he was awake. Entirely. He moved through the water in slow strokes, not for swimming's sake but for the sensation, the way the chill moved across his shoulders, how the tips of his fingers tingled as they parted the liquid. Above him, the ceiling was a smooth dome painted with faint outlines of constellations. Some had faded, but the Big Dipper remained, traced in dull silver leaf. He stared up at it, imagining the same stars beyond the bathhouse, glittering over Rome, indifferent and eternal. After a few more moments, Hadrian moved to the edge, pressing both hands to the marble lip of the pool. The stone was slick beneath his palms. He pulled himself up, water running in thin rivulets down his arms and chest, pooling at his feet as he stood on the final step. A servant waited nearby with a linen towel warmed over a small brazier. Hadrian accepted it with a soft murmur of thanks. He rubbed the water from his face and shoulders, then wrapped the cloth loosely around his waist. A second towel, dry and thick, was passed to him for his hair. He tousled it gently, letting the warmth absorb the last of the chill. The others in the room moved quietly, without the energy of arrival but with the softness of closure. Their conversations, if they had any, were muted. This was the hour when even laughter took on a hush. Hadrian looked once more at the pool, its surface now still and glassy again. Somewhere deep inside, the cold remained, not discomfort, but a seed of clarity, planted for the rest of the night. He stepped into the adjacent chamber, where warmed oil and gentle hands waited. But even as the masseur began his slow, practiced work, Hadrian's thoughts lingered on the plunge. That final moment of surrender. The cold that peeled away every layer and left only breath, and blood, and quiet. In the end, he thought, the bathhouse was not about sweat or scent or speech. It was about the letting go. The hour had grown late, and with it, the laughter and warmth of the bathhouse had begun to fade like the final glow of oil lamps nearing their end. The water no longer steamed with the urgency of dozens of visitors. Instead, it settled into a quiet rhythm, breathing slowly with the low gurgle of distant fountains and the occasional lap of water against polished stone. The caldarium stood nearly empty now, its air still heavy with warmth and scent, beeswax, sweat, crushed bay leaves, and lingering incense from earlier hours. Lucius lingered in the apodyterium, the changing room now nearly silent. Only a pair of sandals and a half-unrolled linen tunic lay forgotten on a stone bench. He sat for a long time, wrapping a dry woolen cloak around his shoulders, the cool air licking at his skin. Every movement echoed. The baths had grown cavernous again, a shell emptied of its daytime voice. His eyes wandered to the mosaic beneath his feet. Tiny tesserae formed the image of a nereid, half lost to time, her eyes dulled by wear, her hair outlined in fading lapis and ochre. He reached down, brushing the tiles absently, tracing the outline of one of her arms. The artisans who had placed these stones were long dead, and yet their hands still touched the world, echoing in silence beneath sandal and bare sole alike. A low voice startled him. "You remained behind again, Lucius?" It was Crispus, the old night porter, bald and slightly stooped, with eyes sharp as cracked glass. He carried a brass lantern that cast tall shadows across the columns. They danced along the vaulted ceiling and clung to the archways like cautious ghosts. "I like the quiet," Lucius replied, voice low. Crispus chuckled. "Most do not. The quiet makes them feel alone. But the bathhouse, she speaks, if you know how to listen. When the others leave, she begins to murmur again." Lucius looked up, curious. "What does she say?" The porter paused near a tall statue of Apollo, its marble gaze fixed outward. "Depends on the night. Some say she remembers voices, the senators, the slaves, the lovers. I think she remembers the footsteps. They echo longer." Lucius smiled, more to himself than to Crispus. "Do you stay all night?" Crispus nodded, the lantern's light glinting off the iron keyring at his belt. "To lock the doors, to check the fires. But mostly to wait. The water needs time to cool, and the gods dislike an empty temple." Lucius glanced toward the frigidarium, the cold room at the far end. Its door stood ajar, the dark within like an unopened scroll. He imagined it waiting, not for people, but for stories to unfold again the next day. The porter stepped past him, checking a brass brazier, stoking it gently with a hooked iron rod. A thin trail of smoke rose upward, curling like a question. "You'll catch a chill if you sleep here," he warned. "I won't sleep," Lucius said, though he wasn't sure he meant it. His limbs were heavy with warmth, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. The baths had lulled him as surely as a lullaby. From somewhere deep in the hypocaust, the hidden space beneath the floor, came the faint clank of settling metal and the hiss of dying heat. The final embers of the day. Lucius finally rose, gathering his tunic and folding it with care. He had seen the bathhouse from its most vibrant to its quietest hour. It felt like watching a living thing breathe its last sigh before slumber. As he moved to leave, he paused one last time at the central pool. Its surface was still. Beneath it, the mosaic floor shimmered faintly, distorted by water and time. "The final ember," he whispered, echoing Crispus's words. And the bathhouse, in its hush, seemed to breathe back. The warmth of the bathhouse was beginning to retreat, and with it, the heat that had once clung to every surface like a second skin. In the tepidarium, where once the voices of men bounced off marble walls, now there was only the soft drip of condensation falling from domed ceilings. Aurelia moved slowly through the half-dark, a folded cloth in her hands, its edges still damp from use. Her sandals made barely a sound. She had been one of the last to leave the women's side of the baths, lingering longer than most. Not out of need, but affection. There was something sacred in these last hours, something no crowded midday ever allowed. She walked past the alcove where she had scrubbed her arms with olive oil and ash, the rough mixture rubbed into her skin by practiced hands. Now the ashes were scattered across the basin's edge, dark smears trailing where water had trickled down. A single oil lamp still burned near the bronze spout of a lion's head, the same one that had gurgled warm water earlier in the evening. Its mouth now issued nothing but silence. She reached for her basket, left neatly beside the wooden bench. Within, a small comb carved from bone, a half-empty vial of oil perfumed with lavender, and a strip of linen carefully rolled. Familiar objects. Nothing grand, but all cherished in their own quiet way. Aurelia lifted the comb and gently passed it through her still damp hair. She felt it tug slightly, the teeth catching, the strands reluctant to part. The sound, soft, rhythmic, seemed to fill the whole room. She did not rush. No one waited for her now. And so, she combed, and listened to the bathhouse exhale. A gust of air, perhaps from a door being latched in another wing, stirred the torchlight and made the shadows tremble. Columns seemed to lean and right themselves again. Above her, the domed ceiling bore the painted signs of the zodiac, faded from years of rising steam and drifting smoke. Aquarius, the water-bearer, watched her from high above, his urn forever tilted, water flowing down an invisible stream. Once, as a girl, she had been frightened of the silence here at night. Now it comforted her. She had begun to sense the rhythm behind it, not a silence of emptiness, but one of deep listening. The walls absorbed every footfall, every breath, and offered back only stillness. Aurelia wrapped herself in her cloak. Its wool smelled faintly of lye soap and wood smoke. She sat on the bench a while longer, her back against cool marble. There had been women here earlier, laughing, gossiping, soaking sore feet, massaging tired arms. One had sung briefly, a lullaby perhaps, meant for her own comfort more than any listener. That voice had long since faded, but Aurelia could still feel it, like warmth trapped in stone. Footsteps eventually approached. Not urgent ones. Shuffling, deliberate. It was Julia, one of the bathhouse attendants, her long braid tucked beneath a linen wrap, eyes slightly sunken from the long shift. "Still here?" Julia said gently. Aurelia nodded. "Only for a moment longer. No rush. We're just checking the lamps." She knelt to trim the wick of one, its flame wavering at her breath. They sat quietly together, no need to fill the silence with words. Their shared presence was enough, two women surrounded by stone, steam, and time. A moment suspended. At last, Aurelia rose. "Thank you," she whispered. Julia smiled and pressed a warm hand to her arm, brief, familiar. "Be well, sister." And with that, Aurelia stepped through the archway, her silhouette framed by the last flicker of lamplight behind her. The air outside would be cooler now, the stars perhaps visible through drifting city smoke. But within the bathhouse, there remained the scent of lavender and ash. A touch of warmth on the stone bench. And silence, not barren, but filled with all that had passed through. The night deepened, and the bathhouse settled further into its long, remembered breath. In the deeper quarters of the bathhouse, far beyond the polished marble and the laughter that had long since faded, the air was heavier. Not with conversation or perfume, but with labor, quiet, ceaseless, and warm as a heartbeat beneath the city's skin. This was where the fire lived. Crispus knelt before the furnace mouth, his tunic dark with soot and his forehead gleaming with sweat. The hypocaustum, the underfloor heating system, slumbered now, but only barely. Its appetite for wood and flame was endless, and even as the last patrons dried their skin and the lanterns guttered above the pools, it demanded tending. A pile of olive logs sat nearby, their bark cracked and ready to surrender to flame. He chose each one carefully. Not too thick, the heat must move easily. Not too thin, the burn must last through the final hour. He fed them to the fire with the ease of long familiarity, his hands never hesitating, his movements a kind of prayer. The hearth glowed, its interior pulsing gold and red like a slow-beating heart. Shadows danced across the stone wall behind him, warped silhouettes that seemed to shift with memory and time. Above, the floors radiated the warmth his labor made possible. Men and women wandered the bathhouse, their limbs soothed, unaware of the quiet figure who knelt beneath them. But Crispus did not resent this. He found peace here. The fire never lied. It never whispered behind his back. It never demanded flattery or bribes. It only asked to be fed, and in return, it gave warmth, light, life. He stirred the coals with an iron rod, watching sparks leap up like tiny birds startled into flight. The ashes whispered against stone. Occasionally, a drip of condensation fell from the low archway above, steam reborn as water, and hissed when it touched the edge of the furnace, vanishing in an instant. He paused to wipe his brow on the hem of his tunic. His palms were calloused, the skin along his arms nicked and weathered from years of this work. He had been tending fires since he was barely taller than the furnace door. His father had stood here before him, hands as blackened and scarred. And his father's father, too. No statue would bear their likeness. No poets would chant their names. But every stone that stayed warm through the night remembered them. Crispus took a moment to sit on the low stool beside the wall, letting the fire do its work without him for a breath or two. From his satchel, he pulled a crust of bread, softened with oil, and ate it slowly. The taste of smoke lingered even on the food, the same smoke that had curled into his clothes, his hair, his skin. A small ceramic jug sat nearby, cool and wrapped in cloth. He drank sparingly from it, the water sharp and cold on his tongue. Even here, in the lowest room of the bathhouse, there was still room for simple pleasure. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep, that was a risk not worth taking near flame, but to rest. He listened to the crackle and hush of the fire, the low creak of the ductwork as it cooled in places and surged in others. These were the sounds of night, no voices, no argument, only the quiet conversation of stone and heat. And then, a soft scrape, footsteps above. Perhaps a final servant returning to collect a forgotten tool. Perhaps a stray bather lingering in thought. The floor above groaned slightly, warmed by the breath of the furnace beneath it. Crispus smiled. Even that small sound, a footfall overhead, meant his fire had done its work. The warmth had risen. The floors had held. He stood again, stretched his shoulders, and returned to the hearth. Another log. Another stoke. The flames curled upward, eager and bright. He would tend them until dawn threatened the sky. He always did. And when the last coal dimmed and the bathhouse finally fell into true silence, it would be his warmth the walls remembered, long after the voices had gone. By the time the final sandals had echoed through the atrium and the main doors had been bolted shut, the bathhouse had begun to exhale. Not dramatically, not like the theaters or the taverns, which emptied with laughter and slurred farewells, but gently, slowly, like a body reclining after a long day. The stone corridors, once full of life, now held only echoes, and even those were fading. In the apodyterium, the changing room, forgotten items lingered like shy guests who hadn't realized the party was over. A single sandal. A child's ivory comb. A folded towel, still damp from the steam. Livia moved quietly through the space, her linen shift whispering against her legs as she stooped to collect what remained. She was the last of the balnearia, the bath attendants, still awake, her companions already tucked into their sleeping quarters. There had been more visitors than expected this evening. A minor feast day, perhaps. Or simply the heavy heat of summer drawing the restless to steam and water. She didn't mind the late hour. The quiet suited her. The glow of the oil lamps was softer now, their flames thinning, as if they too were preparing to rest. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, not ominous, but gentle, like folds in a worn blanket. At the corner of the wooden bench, she found a small wax tablet left behind. She turned it over in her hands. The surface bore the faint scratchings of a half-written letter, a name, a phrase, then hesitation. She traced the marks with a fingertip, wondering who had sat here, legs still damp, fingers uncertain. Perhaps a young merchant, composing a message to his father. Or a wife unsure of the words to send north, where her brother served on the frontier. Livia tucked the tablet into her apron. It would wait in the lost items shelf, among the rings and necklaces, until its owner returned, or until someone else claimed it, unable to resist a mystery half-written. She passed through the tepidarium, where the air still held a soft, lingering warmth. The benches were empty now. The bronze mirrors along the walls were darkened, no longer catching the play of candlelight. Their reflections were cloudy, as though the room itself had turned inward, dreaming of the hours just past. The mosaic beneath her feet showed sea creatures swimming in a circle, dolphins and eels, their colored stones worn smooth from centuries of sandals. She paused to study them. Their pattern never changed. But they seemed to move, always, in the corner of the eye. Caught in an eternal loop, just beneath the surface of time. In the caldarium, the last of the steam hung low, thickening the air with moisture and memory. The marble benches still glistened. Droplets clung to the curve of the basin, slipping down in lazy rivulets. Livia dipped a cloth into the water, wrung it gently, and wiped the marble surfaces with a rhythm both practiced and gentle. Her motions weren't rushed. This was the ritual of closing, as sacred in its own way as the opening chants at dawn. A bathhouse that wasn't properly closed could become restless. Damp could sour. Tiles could shift. Spirits, or at least ill moods, could fester in corners where water had been left to stagnate. Her grandmother had told her that once. She lit a bundle of bay and juniper leaves, letting the slow-burning herbs send their scented smoke curling into the room's crevices. It was part of the old ways, not required, not enforced by the overseers, but still respected. Even the sternest master of the baths did not object to Livia's fumigation. A bathhouse that smelled of bay was a bathhouse at peace. From behind a pillar, she heard the soft squeak of a rat. A harmless one, probably curled behind the furnace walls. She smiled faintly. Even the smallest creatures had learned the rhythms of this place, the rising of heat, the movement of feet, the stillness of night. She took her time returning to the main corridor. There was no need to rush. The hours between midnight and dawn belonged to silence. To flame and memory. To breath and stone. Before extinguishing the final lanterns, she knelt by the threshold, pressing her palm briefly to the floor. It was still warm. Crispus had done his work well. The warmth that once clung to the stone walls like breath now slipped away with the soft hiss of settling embers. The hypocaust beneath the floor, once roaring with life, had fallen silent. Only a faint glow remained, not in the fire, but in the sheen of water on tile, in the shimmer of oil on a brass dish, in the quiet hum of memory that lingered in the chamber like the aftertaste of incense. The last attendants moved like shadows, gathering towels with practiced ease, stacking wooden sandals beside the doorway, whispering to one another in low, melodic Latin. The laughter, the steam, the grand debates, all had dissolved, like vapors rising to the rafters. Cassius paused in the frigidarium doorway. One hand rested against the cool stone as he looked back. The caldarium stood empty now, ghost-like, its marble benches streaked with the faint traces of water and oil, as if the bath had dreamed the evening into being and now slowly forgot it. A woman's bracelet glinted in a crack between tiles, forgotten. A stray vine leaf clung to the side of a wine jug. These were the relics of a night that had flickered like flame, brief but beautiful. Cassius did not speak. He only exhaled, a soft white breath in the cold air. It curled upward and disappeared. He stepped outside into the night. Behind him, the door closed with a gentle click. The bathhouse exhaled its final breath, quiet, content, and at peace. The stars above burned steadily, the last embers of the sky. And somewhere far away, another lamp was being lit, another story beginning, as this one came to rest. The bathhouse stood in silence now, a hushed colossus of stone and shadow beneath the stars. Its domes no longer echoed with laughter or splashes, only the quiet drip of condensation from high ceilings to cool, empty floors. The air, once thick with the scent of oil and steam, had thinned into something still and solemn, like a temple at rest. Outside, a breeze rustled through the cypress trees, stirring loose petals along the colonnaded path. A stray dog padded across the courtyard, sniffing at the stone steps, then disappearing again into the darkness. All that remained were the walls, the water stains, the warmth fading slowly from the floors. Cassius had returned once more, long after closing. He stood barefoot beneath the oculus, gazing up at the circle of stars beyond. In his hand, the lost bracelet, recovered, now cool to the touch. He didn't know the woman who had left it, only that she had laughed freely and leaned too far into the steam. It felt right to return it. He placed it on the edge of the pool, like an offering. Not to the gods, but to the memory of the evening. To the bathhouse itself. Cassius lingered beside the pool for a long while, unmoving, as if waiting for the bathhouse to breathe again. Though the fire had died in the caldarium, its heat clung faintly to the floors. The marble still whispered warmth through the soles of his feet, warmth that came not just from the embers of wood but from the memory of bodies, voices, footsteps. The bathhouse was never entirely empty. It remembered. He walked slowly, hands behind his back, down the central corridor. The torchlight flickered in bronze wall sconces, though most had burned low. Shadows swayed gently on the walls, tall and thin like forgotten statues. Past the apoditerium, the shelves were bare now, cloaks, sandals, tunics all taken. And yet, traces remained. A bit of sand where a soldier had stood. A damp handprint fading on the plaster. The faintest trace of perfume in the air, gone as quickly as it came. The frigidarium loomed before him, the last chamber, the cold plunge. Cassius paused at its edge. The water was dark and still, reflecting the coffered ceiling in crisp, silent patterns. No one had stepped in since late afternoon. The surface was undisturbed, the kind of stillness that made a man hesitate before breaking it. He let out a soft breath. Not tonight. Instead, he turned back toward the tepidarium, tracing the familiar route through pillars and warm brick. Each room he passed seemed to sigh, not in grief or exhaustion, but like a beast settling down for the night. The Thermi lived a double life, vibrant by day, ghostly by night. And it was in this ghostliness that Cassius found peace. In the corners of the tepidarium, cleaning boys had done their work well. Tiles shone faintly where water had dried, and the bronze bowls were stacked neatly in alcoves. A lone strigil lay forgotten on a bench, its curved blade catching the low firelight. Cassius picked it up, turning it in his hand. The tool was smooth with use, the metal darkened by age and oil. It had scraped away sweat and fatigue from hundreds of bodies, and now it lay still, as if waiting for the next story. He set it down gently, careful not to break the silence. Above, the lanterns cast drowsy patterns on the vaulted ceiling. The air was no longer scented with oils or lavender but with faint ash, damp stone, and that particular scent of warm air turning cool, the quiet breath of a structure that had exhaled. A distant clatter echoed, small and hollow, perhaps from a falling broom or a door that hadn't latched. Cassius didn't move. The sound was familiar, part of the rhythm of the bathhouse after hours. He had walked these halls enough to know that the walls spoke in little ways when left alone. Returning to the palestra, he looked out over the open courtyard now painted in moonlight. The benches were empty, the training posts abandoned. The night insects had taken over the soundscape, chirping in delicate waves beneath the steady rustle of the trees. Beyond the high wall, the city of Rome murmured, a cartwheel in the distance, a dog barking, a drunken song tapering into silence. But within the walls, all was calm. The fires had cooled. The voices had gone. And Cassius, though technically intruding after hours, felt no shame in being here. He belonged to the place just as much as the walls, the benches, the strigils, and the very air that hung above the pools. Tonight, the bathhouse was not just empty, it was resting. digesting the day. And as Cassius lowered himself onto a stone bench near the colonnade, he let his shoulders drop and his breath deepen. No rush. No duties now. Just the fading warmth beneath him, the moon above, and the echo of steps long gone. In a tucked-away chamber near the furnaces, the last embers glowed beneath a layer of soft ash. A thin wisp of smoke curled lazily from the mouth of the hypocaust vent, rising like incense to the high ceiling above. The fire had done its duty for the day, stoked in the blue light of morning, fed with care through the rush of noon, and now left to rest in the cradle of brick and soot. Cassius bent low and scooped up a pinch of the fine, pale ash between his fingers. It was warm, silken, like the dust that gathered in a scroll room after a season of disuse. This was the heart of the bathhouse, not the mosaic pools or the fine marble columns, but this quiet, glowing hearth where warmth was born. He stood in silence, listening. The low hum of the wind slipped through the air shafts. Somewhere a single droplet of water fell, then another. It was the soft, sacred rhythm of things returning to stillness. Outside, the moon was sinking. The stars seemed to blink more slowly. Within, all was waiting, the stone, the ash, the steam, and the silence. A light breeze stirred the hanging towels in the apoditarium. They swayed gently, ghost-like in the flickering torchlight. The bathhouse stood mostly empty now, its chambers hushed like a theater long after the final act. One figure remained. A young attendant, no older than 17, moved barefoot across the cool mosaic floor, collecting a forgotten sandal, folding a towel left carelessly over a bench. His motions were slow, deliberate, not rushed. Each step echoed softly in the domed space. As he passed the cold plunge, he paused, gazing at his reflection in the dark water. His face was blurred, stretched by ripples. He didn't disturb it. He knew these halls better in silence than in noise. The bathhouse, at night, seemed to remember things, not with words, but with warmth lingering in the tiles and whispers that clung to the pillars. He gathered the last oil jar and turned, leaving only the faintest print behind on the tile. Outside, the stars faded one by one as the horizon hinted at morning. Inside, the final ember pulsed quietly in the furnace's belly, too small now to give heat, but not yet gone. It would wait, through silence, through stillness, through ash and breath and memory. And in the evening, it would be born again.